Greetings from SpiritQuest Sedona Retreats, the place for healing, self-growth, and relationship repair. Thanks for joining us. Hello, I'm Catherine Lash, and today I'd like to talk to you about the good girl trap, unlearning perfectionism and setting boundaries. This is something that a lot of women deal with that I've talked to over the years. And really, the good girl trap happens when being loved and accepted, safe, or valued becomes connected with being agreeable. And when we connect that with being accommodating and easy to be around and successful and helpful. The goal really isn't to stop caring or being generous. It's really to recognize when caregiving has become self-abandonment. So today I'd like to dive in with the roots of conditioning and how we learned to become good girls. When did you first learn that being good meant making other people happy? For many women, the conditioning starts very young. For example, a little girl might hear words like, be nice, don't talk back, think about everyone else, don't hurt their feelings, you're such a good girl when you help me, you need to be responsible, what will people think? These types of phrases aren't necessarily bad by themselves, but the problem is when a child begins to associate being loved or accepted with being compliant. For example, let's just imagine that there's a little girl at Thanksgiving. She's exhausted, but Grandma wants a hug. She doesn't want to hug Grandma, but Mom says, come on, give Grandma a hug. Don't be rude. The child immediately learns my discomfort is less important than someone else's feelings. Years later, the same woman at age 35 might be thinking, I don't really want to go to this event, but I don't want them to be disappointed in me. This is the same pattern, but a different situation. Let's look at another example of becoming an emotional caretaker. So a daughter may be growing up sensing when mom is upset. She learns if mom is happy, the household is peaceful. So she becomes helpful and agreeable and quiet and emotionally responsible. Eventually, she may become the woman who walks into the room and immediately scans who's upset, who do they need, how can I fix this? But she doesn't ever ask, what do I need? Now that's conditioning. Another aspect we can look at is cultural expectations. Women have historically been taught that being feminine means being nurturing, accommodating, emotionally available, self-sacrificing, attractive, successful, sexually appealing, supportive of everyone else, good mothers, good partners, good daughters, good employees, good friends. And now women are often expected to do all of that work and also have a career, exercise, eat perfectly, travel, look youthful, somehow remain calm. But that's an impossible standard. The good girl doesn't necessarily ask, what do I want? She asks, what will make everyone else okay? Well, this leads to a physical and energetic toll. When someone repeatedly says yes, when they really mean no, and they suppress their anger, they ignore their exhaustion, and constantly monitor everyone else's emotions, it can lead to chronic stress pattern. So the body may begin holding what the person doesn't feel safe expressing. Someone says, oh, I'm fine, but they're really not fine. So they just swallow the anger. They smile and they go home and they clench their teeth. Someone asks, can you take this extra project on? And they definitely want to say no, but instead they say, sure, I can do it. And then they're up until midnight finishing it. Or another woman saying, it's okay, when it really isn't okay. And saying to themselves, I have to hold everything together. The thing is that chronic stress can leave people feeling depleted and exhausted and wired but tired, tense and emotionally burned out. When people what they sometimes call adrenal fatigue isn't a recognized medical diagnosis, but really is a prolonged stress absolutely that needs attention. So energetically, we can look at this and say, how much of your energy is going toward managing other people's experiences? For example, if you're at dinner with your partner, they seem quiet, immediately your mind goes to, are they mad at me? Then, did I do something? Then, should I ask what's wrong? Then, maybe I should make them feel better? Suddenly, you're no longer present. Your energy has moved from your own experience to managing theirs. So here's a good phrase for you. People-pleasing is often an attempt to create safety by controlling the emotional environment around us. That's an interesting thing to look at because many people-pleasers aren't simply nice. They're hyper-aware. They're constantly reading the room. And what we need is we need boundaries. We need to look at ourselves and say, wow, having good boundaries is actually an act of love. Many people equate it with, I'm being selfish. But a boundary isn't punishment. A boundary isn't rejection. It isn't, you can't do that because I said so. A healthy boundary is, this is what I can participate in and this is what I cannot. If someone's talking to you and instead of immediately saying, for example, Mom, you can't talk to me like that. Instead, you could say something like, I'm happy to have this conversation, but I'm not willing to continue if we're yelling at each other. I'll talk with you when we're both calmer. Now that is a good boundary. You're not controlling Mom. You're just defining your participation. Let's look at the same example or a similar example at work. Someone asks you to work on Saturday, and the girl says, sure, no problem. And then internally says to herself, why does everyone always take advantage of me? Well, this boundary might be something like, I'm not available Saturday, but I can give you Monday. That's really important. You don't have to write a whole paragraph explaining yourself. You really, as soon as you just feel it in your body, that sort of gut feeling of, doesn't feel good, you can just have a quick, simple shift and a simple sentence. You don't have to explain it all. Another example, a friend calls at midnight and they're wanting to talk about their relationship problems. And this is continually happening. Instead of continually to answer them and feel guilty, you could say something like, I love you, and I'm not available for heavy conversations late at night, but I would love to talk to you tomorrow. So the deeper lesson is, without boundaries, resentment grows. And when you feel resentment, it is a sign that you maybe have been giving from a place where you actually wanted to say no. So a boundary doesn't make a relationship less loving. Sometimes the boundary is what makes the relationship sustainable. So there's a difference between a boundary and a wall. A wall keeps everyone out. A boundary says you can come this far. A boundary allows intimacy without self-abandonment. So when we dive in and we start unmasking the perfectionist, and we take a look at that good girl syndrome, we can understand that perfectionism isn't always, I want to be everything to be perfect. Sometimes it's, if I do everything perfectly, then nobody can criticize me. Or if I'm successful enough, I'll finally feel worthy. Or if I don't make mistakes, people won't reject me. Well, that's a completely different conversation. The perfectionist makes an unconscious deal. I'll work harder, achieve more, be more beautiful, be more successful, be a better partner, be a better mother, employee, friend, and then I'll finally feel like I'm enough. But the problem is that the finish line keeps moving. You accomplish the goal, you get the promotion, you lose the weight, you launch the business, you raise the kids. And instead of I'm proud of myself, the brain says, okay, what's next? So really, sometimes it's about the fear of they'll judge me, they'll be disappointed, they'll think I'm lazy, they'll reject me, I'll feel embarrassed, I'll feel like a failure. And really, you can separate that and say achievement doesn't equate to worth. Productivity does not equate to worth. Being needed, again, does not equate to worth. You were born worthy, and you don't have to perform your way into worthiness. Now let's look at stepping into radical self-sovereignty. Self-sovereignty is essentially, I am willing to listen to myself and allow my own inner truth to have a seat at the table. It doesn't mean I don't care about everyone else. It actually means I don't abandon myself in order to care about somebody else. Here are some practical exercises. Number 1, the 3-second pause. Before automatically saying yes, take a breath. Pause. Ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? Not can I do this? Because you probably can. But do I want to do this? This is a huge distinction. Or something like exercise 2. Stop giving immediate answers. Let me check my schedule before I get back to you. This one sentence can completely interrupt the people-pleasing pattern. You don't have to make a decision while someone else is standing in front of you. Exercise 3. Notice the body. Before saying yes, notice, what does my body do? Does your chest tighten? Does your stomach drop? Did your shoulders get tense? Did you suddenly feel exhausted? Did you clench your jaw? What is my body telling me? You are teaching yourself and others to connect to their own internal signals. Here's exercise 4. Practice a small no. Don't start with your most emotionally complicated relationship, but start small. No, I can't make it tonight. No, I'm not available this weekend. No, thank you. Then notice the discomfort. And here's the important part. Don't immediately fix the discomfort by changing the answer. Let yourself feel a little guilty without assuming you've done something wrong. Guilt does not always mean you've done something wrong. Sometimes guilt is simply a feeling of doing something unfamiliar. And exercise 5. Ask yourself one question every morning. Instead of immediately asking, what do I need to get done today? Ask, what do I need today? Maybe it's rest. Maybe it's solitude. Maybe it's movement. Maybe it's connection. Maybe it's creativity. Maybe it's boundaries. Maybe it's nourishment, play, silence. That's self-honoring. So really, it's about becoming self-connected. A woman who no longer needs to be the good girl can still be loving. She can still be generous, compassionate, still care deeply, but now there's a difference. She chooses to give rather than obligated to give. She chooses to help rather than needing to be needed. She chooses connection rather than performing for acceptance. And most importantly, she no longer has to abandon herself to keep everyone else comfortable. So I would like to leave you with a powerful closing question. Where in your life are you saying yes because you genuinely want to? And where are you saying yes because you're afraid of what might happen if you say no? And what would change if you trusted yourself enough to honor the answer? I just want to leave that with you and tell you that our women's retreats in Sedona are perfect for overcoming perfectionism and setting healthy boundaries. I would love to have you join us here at SpiritQuest Sedona Retreats.